I know that some in our audience know the finer points of hockey.
The Chris Johnston Show.
We are your friends.
The biggest stories, bringing you inside the game.
What did you hear?
The Chris Johnston Show. Powered by Sports Interaction. Wanna bet?
What is going on?
Here's Chris with your host, Julian McKenzie.
Part of the game.
Can you imagine if NHL Trade Center was on Sunday and you didn't have to wait for Friday? Or James Duffy with all these moves going on over the weekend, including maybe the wildest one of them all. And maybe you'd think it'd be the Timo Meyer one. No. Tanner Jeannot gets flipped for 5 picks. There's a bunch of deals we're going to recap on today's edition of the show. We'll try to look at some other guys as well. But we need to talk about Tanner Jeannot and why Julien BriseBois feels, I mean, I guess there's a track record that shows, okay, he feels comfortable flipping the firsts, but a first in 2025 that's top 10 protected, a second in 2024, a third, a fourth, and a fifth in this year's draft, and Cal Foot for Tanner Jeannot. Like, help me make sense of that, please, before we get to all the other trades.
Well, there's a couple things I think we all need to understand, and this stands for any player or any situation we're talking about before and after this. There's no such thing as fair market value in the NHL, right? When you get to the trade deadline, the player goes to the highest bidder. And sometimes, you know, whether we're talking about a Timo Meyer trade, we might not think there's enough there to justify that. You know, I'm pretty confident New Jersey had what San Jose deemed to be the best offer. And in this case, the Tampa Bay Lightning identified a player in Tanner Jeannot who plays a certain way. He's tough as hell. Great forechecker, and is 25 years old. He's a restricted free agent, so they have at least one more year of team control after this one. And I would suggest to you the odds are likely, given their track record, that they're going to sign him to some kind of long-term deal and lock him in like they did with Nick Paul last year. And, you know, when you look at what those picks are, what are the odds an NHL player comes out of those 5 draft picks? I mean, I don't know how to quantify that. I do know NHL teams have smart enough people in the front offices that can. But what are the odds of someone coming out of that 5 picks that is ready to help the Tampa Bay Lightning in the window when they have Nikita Kucherov, Vasilevsky, Hedman, Point, Stamkos, and on down the list of this team? I mean, they have a special core, and I think this is a very calculated kind of bet. It's a bet I actually believe the Lightning know. The odds are it's not going to look great, right? I mean, what makes it look great? I guess if they go to another Stanley Cup final, no one's going to question it. If they lose in round 1, which could happen, or round 2, maybe you say, oh, that was a lot. But, you know, they're just trying to graft players on to the core of their team to maximize what they get out of this core in this time. It's really hard to get as many great players. Sorry, Julian, got to clear my throat here. Getting on my soapbox, and my throat is ready for it.
Get the soapbox ready for siege. Let's go.
But it's really hard to get this many great players together at one time the way they have. They have something special. And so the way that you build that team, I think you have to be thinking very specifically about how best to maximize those assets, right? Every team has unique circumstances. And I polled some people around the league. Like I asked just, you know, what did you think of the return? I got insane back from someone. Someone else said it was too cute. You know, like there's a lot of people.
Too cute?
Yeah, I think meaning that, you know, it has worked in the past. They got Goodrow and Coleman and Hagel and gave up what seemed like a lot at the time, and it worked. And some people thinking, you know, at least one person thinking maybe that they're going too far down the same strategy, but maybe this isn't a player worth doing it with. What have you. Anyway, the point is that sentiment is out there. I'm sure hockey fans, I mean, I saw my Twitter feed. Everyone is going like, wow, because we haven't seen this. But here's the Lightning's problem. They'd already traded their 23rd and 24th first round picks. Nashville wanted 2 first rounders for Jeannot. Again, we're not talking about a rental player. It's a different kind of acquisition. And so Tampa's only way that they felt they could make this deal was quantity over quality. And here we are. I like it because it's different. I think it's hard to criticize Julien BriseBois in general. I mean, he's probably the smartest GM in the league, certainly in the top handful. And he's consistently made bold moves that have paid off. And I think he's I think he's playing 3D chess compared to some of his counterparts sometimes. This might be a gamble they lose, but I like that they're making the gamble. And quite honestly, if you're the Tampa Bay Lightning, it's all bonus at this point. I mean, there's no point in trying to be good for them 6 years down the road. Like they've got this year and next year, maybe after that. But at some point, this core is either going to age out or the players, won't be able to perform at the level they are. And they're going to have to, it's going to be a wicked rebuild at some point in the future. But, by that point, Julian Brisebois' hand might be weighed down by all the rings he's wearing. And I think that's really the point here.
Okay. So you're looking at it from the front loaded perspective and the fact that they've got the window. And look, the Tampa Bay Lightning are still a very good team. I've said it before, like, Boston's really good, but like, would it surprise me that Tampa somehow ended up in the Eastern Conference Final and then winning it? No, it wouldn't surprise me at all because they still have really good bones. It's just on the face, like 5 picks and a young player for a guy who's going to be your third liner. Like it just looks like a lot, and it just makes me think like, okay, yeah, it is a lot. Totally is. Like, it's a lot. It's just like, holy crap! But also just the fact that he's under $1 million. And he does have another year beyond this year. Like, just there's this premium that's coming up for guys who could be who are affordable, and you could just easily fit under your salary cap to the point where we're throwing up 5 picks at a young player.
Well, think about it this way too. I mean, you have to have real cachet with your owner to be able to make this move, right? I mean, not every general manager in the league would want to put their own sort of ass on the line in this manner. I don't think Julian Brisebois' ass is on the line by any means because his team's been to 3 state Stanley Cup finals, right? So he's got cachet. He's got trust built with Jeff Vinik. Jeff Vinik, as I've said before in this podcast, I think is the best owner in the NHL.
Yes.
And I think that the culture he's built around his team, the way he treats much lower staff in the organization, I just know he's done some really nice things over the years and has built the right kind of foundation for that team. Obviously, between Steve Yzerman initially and then Julian Brisebois, who was Steve Yzerman's right-hand man and then succeeded him as GM, they've had a lot of continuity and stability in the front office. There's a reason why Matthew Darsh, for example, the assistant GM of the Lightning, has been involved in lots of conversations to become GM elsewhere. They've just built a ridiculously strong operation, and they can make gambles like this. I just think a lot of teams would either twist themselves in knots and not be decisive. I mean, this is decisive, right? Nashville has only decided, as we talked about, in the last week or so to become sellers. We saw them trade Nino Niederreiter over the weekend to Winnipeg. Looking at that roster, they don't have a lot of UFAs to sell. So to me, Jeannot was probably going to be their biggest piece. We might argue Matthias Ekholm. It's just Ekholm has the same problem as a lot of other players out there in that he's got a pretty high salary for multiple years. And so not every team, lots of teams love Ekholm. I just don't know how many can actually bring him in right now. And I think Jeannot was going to be the most viable piece for David Poile to play. And Tampa identified their guy and went and got him. And, good on them. This is more like an NBA style trade, man. And do you know what else is funny? And I haven't seen anyone else talk about this. So the 23 and 24 first rounders Tampa traded to Chicago for Brandon Hagel last year, they're both top 10 protected. Now, it's unlikely Tampa ends up in the top 10, but also now their top 10 pick in 25 is top 10 protected. There is a world if Tampa somehow fell off a cliff and one of their picks became a top 10 pick, we're pushing these first rounders out to like 2026, 2027. Like this is actually the closest I've seen an NHL team start to do what we've seen a lot of NBA teams do, which is really trade future capital for the moment. And again, I think if you're being realistic, it's a smart thing to do for the Lightning. Like the Lightning will exist for 50 years beyond this. When are they going to have, as long as there's a hard salary cap, or how are they ever going to get this many difference makers in their lineup at one time? It's almost impossible to bring a team like this together. Like when we look at the other really good teams in the league, teams like the Leafs, even just to borrow one. I mean, they're still making trades for top 6 players because, and they have a really good core. I don't think anyone's arguing about that in terms of the high end quality, but it's just hard to have 6 or 7 or 8 players deep that you really call your core. And that's locked in. That's there. That is performing at a level worthy of their contracts. That's what Tampa has. I mean, they're the class of the league the way they've been built. That doesn't guarantee success. It doesn't mean that they're going to even win a playoff round this spring, but I like that they're dancing to their own tune and everybody else is trying to figure out what the game they're playing is.
But Siege, like here's my thing about the NBA comparison, right? You're absolutely right. Fine. I get why you're making that comparison. And I'll say this. Julien Brisebois, with the track record he has, I get it. He can afford to flip away the first round picks. And yeah, there's some creativity there. But when we make the NBA comparison and we see some of those trades that have been done out there with so much future capital, you're seeing the returns. It's like, well, Kyrie Irving's on one side of that deal. Even Russell Westbrook, who's like, sort of washed by comparison to what we've seen before, getting flipped for whatever. Oh, Patrick, like all these other guys who are like really good. Tanner Jeannot at best is like a third line player and who could work for Tampa Bay. Don't get me wrong, but it's Tanner Jeannot. We're not doing this for like Timo Meyer didn't get this return. You know what I'm saying? Like it's just on the surface, it just looks very like to anyone who didn't know anything about what Julien Brisebois had done before, you're like what the hell is this? But again, you can't really fault him for it.
And let's go back though. Nashville didn't have to trade him, right? He's a restricted free agent at the end of the year. They had to be compelled to trade him now. And it was going to take, I think, 2 first rounders or something like this, which is obviously, I don't know how we measured the second, third, fourth, fifth, and Cal Foot. Is that equal another first rounder? Again, I don't have those valuation charts the way the teams do, but they had to offer something. They had to get to something almost crazy to make it work, I think, because otherwise the Predators didn't have to trade the player and Tampa wanted the player. And here we go. Here we are.
Man,
it's
also, thanks for clarifying the RFA thing. I don't know why I thought he had another year. Sorry, that was just a mistake on my end. Thanks for clarifying that.
But I'm not saying it isn't an overpayment. Like I'm not here to defend that. I like the guts. I like the moxie. I like that you make that move knowing that the rest of the league, when they text me, when I'm asking people what they think, that they know everyone's what they're going to be saying. They don't give a shit. They got two, Julien Brisebois got two cup rings in his ears. He can't hear what you're saying.
Yeah, and all he's yelling is, excuse my French, fuck them picks.
Draft schmaft, as Cliff Fletcher.
Draft schmaft, who cares? Yeah, imagine being on that scouting staff for Tampa. I don't think you have that much to do for the summer and beyond.
The whole Eastern Conference.
Yo,
look at it.
They loaded up.
So we're still 5 days from the deadline, or 4.5 as we're recording. The top 6 teams in the Eastern Conference, 5 of them have now traded a first round pick plus to bring in a real player or players in some cases. The only one that hasn't yet done that is Carolina. And I'm pretty sure, and we're going to get to the Timo Meyer trade on the other side of DB. I'm pretty sure after Carolina struck out on Timo Meyer, they're still going to get up to something too. So, when all is said and done here, this has just been pure wreckage in the Eastern Conference. Like everybody is just unloading what they can and for future capital to try to be great today. And I think we got an awesome playoffs on tap.
Let's take advantage of that tease CJ just did, and let's get to DB. Time for You Can Bet That.
You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Brought to you by Sports Interaction. Get in the action and make a play. 19 plus. Please play responsibly.
Welcome to You Can Bet That with David Bastel. Good to see you, buddy.
Good to see you guys. Hope you had a great weekend.
Remember to hit up sportsinteraction.com/STPN for all of your gaming needs. We all have a pretty good inkling who's going to go number 1 overall in this summer's NHL entry draft. We've only spoken about Connor Bedard so many times on the Chris Johnston Show, but who could go number 2? I mean, Adam Fantilli could be a favorite, but we have some names up for you at Sports Interaction. Take us through it, DB.
Yeah, that's exactly it, guys. It's one of those things where and Chris has talked about this a lot. This is a very good draft. Teams that are going to be falling in even up to 10, you're going to be getting yourself a pretty good player. So Sports Interaction added this weekend who will go number 2. Adam Fantilli out of the University of Michigan is the number 2 favorite right now. But as you guys know, Carlson's in that conversation, Smith, Benson, all sorts of players that, depending on the need of which team, and that's the tricky part, CJ. We don't know what that top 5 is because it's all about the lottery balls and who gets what and which team needs what position, doesn't it?
Yeah, and different organizational priorities, right? Some teams draft for need, others are just purely who they think the best player is. I wonder about the player Michkov out of Russia too. He had a big KHL game over the weekend, scored a lacrosse style goal. Obviously, teams have scouted him more than just seeing some of the highlights that we see bouncing around Twitter. But, it doesn't seem like there's much consensus in this draft after Bedard. I don't think there's any question, of course, about the number 1 overall pick, but whoever is sitting in that number 2 seat is going to have a difficult choice. And sometimes it's better to be in the 3rd or 4th slot where you don't have to make that choice because you might end up getting the best player, just by default.
By the way, when DB says Adam Fantilli's the number 2 favorite, we all know he means the favorite at number 2 and not the number 2 best odds, according to Sports Interaction. I know what you meant. I just want to make sure people understand at home. But yeah, Leo Carlson's up there, Matvei Michkov, Will Smith, Zach Benson, Brandon Yeager as well. It's just some of the names who could be in contention for number 2. But yes, Adam Fantilli right now, the betting favorite to be drafted 2nd overall in this summer's NHL entry draft. Don't forget to check out sportsinteraction.com/SDPN for all the best odds before game, in game, and the best props. sportsinteraction.com/SDPN. We'll talk to you soon, DB. Okay, now we can talk about Timo Meyer getting flipped from San Jose to the New Jersey Devils. Where do we start with this? Do we start with the full trade itself? Do we talk about why this trade took so long to be completed in the first place? We talked about Carolina and New Jersey being in on Timo Meyer. There are so many different ways we can attack this siege. Where do we start?
Well, it's a huge move. Look at the Devils. I only bring this up because I'm so rarely right when we do these prediction shows. But I did have the Devils in the preseason as the sort of the under radar team nobody was talking about that I thought could do well, the dark horse or however we frame that. I was more right than even I thought. I think that they're even better sooner than they thought. They've quietly been building the core or the outline of a really good team there, adding good players. But it's come together in a way this season that maybe you couldn't have totally predicted. But I love that Tom Fitzgerald, their general manager, got aggressive, after seeing how strongly that the team had played for so long through this season. And, it seemed to me that he had really identified Timo Meyer as the guy he wanted to get. He was in it from the start. It was a long process in a sense, various teams at different times were calling on Meyer. We hit on most of them, Toronto at one point, Winnipeg, I think, was seeing what would be there. Carolina was also there from the start, which was an interesting dynamic with the 2 Metropolitan Division teams really being in there aggressively. We know Vegas got involved. St. Louis got involved at one point, after they traded away Tarasenko and O'Reilly and got a few other first rounders. I think Edmonton might have called. I mean, everybody called on Timo Meyer at some point, but Tom Fitzgerald was relentless, gets this deal done. It takes a long time to get over the finish line. I mean, it's a massive package, right? I realize it might be quantity over quality again, but it's 13 total pieces in this trade. I mean, I think I saw Puckpedia put out, it's the most amount of pieces that's been in a trade since his site's been up and running.
Jeez.
It's not often, put it this way. It's been a long time since we've seen a trade with 13 different pieces. As a result, that trade call ended up taking a little longer. I think, it wasn't just due to I think there's some misunderstanding there about what was going on. Partly there was a minor league contractual issue in the deal that I think slowed things up or like forced a little bit of a redo or whatever, make a change to the trade. But then it's also because all these other trades were happening at the same time, right? I know they were smaller moves, but you still have to get the GMs or the assistant GMs on the phone with the central registry and go through the process and confirm the trades. We had the Jack Johnson deal back to Colorado, in that same period of time. Obviously, the Tanner Jeannot deal. Nashville made another deal with Philadelphia for future considerations. There's a few trades going on kind of concurrently on Sunday night. And so I think that the league was slow on that end. Plus they had Barbashev going to Vegas in the morning.
To Vegas.
You had the Dadonov deal from Montreal for Gurianov to Dallas in the morning. So it was a busy day for Central Registry. Like it's all hands on deck when they get to deadline day. I'm not sure they can expect that much action a week out. It was like the GMs were used to the Monday trade deadline. They're like, oh crap, we better get this done on Sunday. Like, I think everyone forgot it. They actually had a few more days here. But back to the original point, New Jersey was aggressive. I think initially New Jersey, when pursuing this move, really wanted to try to get Timo Meyer signed to a long-term deal as part of it. Somewhere along the process, I think they recognized it was just going to be too complicated to have that be a requirement or a condition. I think there's been some brief conversations with Timo Meyer's agent, but it sounds like they didn't initially have the same deal in mind, and it's something they'll probably put off for a period of time here. But I think it's a nice piece of business by New Jersey. I'm not of the view, though, it was a terrible return. I agree it could be a better return, but there's a world that if the Devils get to the conference final one of the next 2 seasons, it's 2 first rounders, plus a recent first rounder in Mock Medulin, plus other pieces. So, I mean, that's a decent return. It actually looks a little bit like, what the Senators got for Erik Karlsson at the time. It didn't look like amazing. It turned out because one of those picks became a very high pick. Obviously, Josh Norris has become a nice player who is a prospect involved in that deal. So, let's give this one some time and see, where things grade out. Because it didn't involve one of the top prospects or young players in the Devil system, like a Dawson Mercer or Holtz. I think people just say, oh, they didn't, I like the bet for New Jersey, but they still, I think it's unfair to classify it as a complete miss by San Jose. I think time will maybe look a little differently on that, but we'll see how that goes.
Get some assets, conditional first, some picks for 2024 as well. Yeah, we retained 50% of my salary to could be a worse return as far as I'm concerned for my career and company in San Jose. Right.
And as I made the point in the Tampa discussion, like the market will tell you what a player is worth. Now, I guess if you're Mike Grier in San Jose and you go canvas all the teams and you see what's on the table, I guess you don't have to trade the player, but in this case, they kind of had to trade the player, and that's where the kind of leverage points come into these talks. And so, it would be easy for us on the outside that weren't part of those discussions to say, well, you should have said to New Jersey, it has to be Dawson Mercer, it has to be a first, and it has to be that. But if they're not willing to pay it and no one else is willing to give you anything equivalent to that, I mean, I do think ultimately you have to make a decision, and there's a risk in waiting too, right? Like the Gavrikov situation in Columbus might not turn out so well for the Blue Jackets, because they weren't able to consummate the deal they thought they had with Boston. Boston pivots in another direction. Now I think they're going to have a tough time getting a first rounder. I mean, when you pull the trigger matters as well. And so, it's easy for us to handicap it on the outside, but I think unless you're in the middle of those conversations, it's a little harder to be that critical of a price paid. Cause I still think it's not insignificant, 2 first round picks and a recent first round pick and a couple other prospects and the like.
So we mentioned Timo Meyer. We kind of touched on Barbashev and Denis Gurianov moving, all these different trades that Central Registry would have had to have dealt with on Sunday. I did not hear the name Patrick Kane once.
You did not. Although if you were watching the Rangers-Kings game, you would have saw some of the ramifications of what New York is having to do to get Patrick Kane, eventually in the fold. I mean, it's pretty wild day. Jake Lecision clears waivers Sunday. They send him to Hartford, the American Hockey League. They call up Ryan Carpenter and have him sit on the bench in that game, but not take a shift. Braden Schneider also sits on the bench. They basically don't play at all in the game, absent a couple seconds, I think, in total. And that was all done because the league requires a team that is under the salary cap ceiling to play at least 18 skaters in every game. So they technically played or dressed 18 skaters in that game. They just didn't play to. It didn't help that K'Andre Miller got kicked out of the game. And so they were actually down 3 skaters essentially. And, it's pretty wild that they did this, but I mean, essentially there was risk if Carpenter or Schneider had been injured in that game, it could have complicated the cap picture. Instead, they're able to send them back to the HL. They're accruing more cap space. What this means, if you're curious about a Patrick Kane deal, is that the soonest it can happen is Wednesday. I think it's possible the trade goes down Thursday instead. Remember, every day closer to the end of the season, every day closer to the deadline in this case, that the cap ramifications for any move get a little bit simpler, a little bit less money is owed to the players, a little bit less cap hit associated with them. It's my understanding the framework of a deal is worked out here, though. There's already a third-party team, I believe, that's signed up to take on 25% of Patrick Kane's salary contract, and so barring a last-minute change of heart from Kane, who obviously has to waive a no movement clause, or some kind of chaos with the Rangers cap picture where they can't make it work, which doesn't seem likely because they've made these series of moves to put themselves in a position. I do think Patrick Kane will be a member of the Rangers, somewhere before 3 p.m. Eastern time on Friday.
2 questions. First one, is there still like a possibility? Yes, he has the no movement clause, but like, I wonder if there's a world of possibility where Patrick Kane actually straight up says, like, you know what? No, I'm not doing this.
I can't answer that because I haven't spoken to him, right? I mean, like, I guess to take it purely on face value, of course, until something's done, it's not done, right? And so while all these things are happening that point to a trade, while the intel is suggesting that, the teams have got to a point where they're going to make that trade, it's until they conduct the trade call, until all the moves have been made, until the Rangers actually have the cap space, and until Patrick Kane signs off on the no movement clause and waives it, nothing is 100% done. People can have a change of heart. It happens in the world. It's happened in the last week in the NHL where, we all thought that Vladislav Gavrikov was going to be traded to Boston. It's contingent on the Bruins making some other moves to clear up cap space to make that deal with Columbus. Ultimately, Dmitry Orlov becomes available. They pivot in that direction. I'm sure Columbus, that's a tough thing to happen in the front office. I saw that Jarmo Kekalainen was sort of quoted as saying that it, nothing untoward happened, but it's unfortunate how it all unfolded. I mean, this can happen. So yes, I can't say with 100% certainty that it's done until it's done. But at the same time, I also don't believe the Rangers would be going to this extent with their roster. I mean, they've lost a few games in a row heading into that game against Los Angeles, and they're basically intentionally playing down a few players in order to create the cap room needed or to protect the cap space needed to get Kane. I can't believe that they would go to that extent to do things unless they had a very real reason to believe that Patrick Kane was willing to waive his no move clause and come play for them.
And the second question I have is, if this is all this waiting period is essentially being done in the name of accruing cap space, why don't the Rangers wait until Friday where they could max out as much as possible to accommodate Patrick Kane's salary?
Well, that might still yet happen. I think it's because they can do these series of moves and get the cap space by Wednesday. They play a game Wednesday night against Philadelphia. So, maybe there's a world they somehow create the cap space, get the trade done, and get Patrick Kane in the lineup for that game. If not, I would still think Thursday is a reasonable possibility. Keeping in mind that the third party broker team, has to have the cap space available and has to pay real money to Patrick Kane. So, maybe it benefits them to have it come later. So this is fluid. I think, like, for those of us, and I follow this fairly closely, but for those of us not managing the cap every day, like, I don't think people realize that literally your cap position can change based on injuries that happen in the games you're playing every day. All these sort of situations play into it. So, they're managing a situation in real time while trying to create the room for Patrick Kane. And so who knows, maybe it somehow goes till Friday. I'm not putting it out there. I'm just saying it can happen. I know for a fact it can happen sooner than Wednesday. I have some reason to believe it might not happen till Thursday. And look, something might happen between then and now that pushes it to Friday, but the deadline is Friday, 3 p.m. Eastern. And I'm pretty confident by that point in time, this will have all been sorted out and Kane will be on his way to Broadway.
Okay, let's look ahead to as much as we can to Friday with some of the pieces still available. We've mentioned Vladislav Gavrikov, Jacob Chikrin is still out there as well, Luke Schenn, Brock Besser. In terms of the pieces that are there, in terms of some teams who could be active, what do we have to look forward to for these next few days?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting market now, isn't it? Like, all the high end forwards essentially are off the board. I mean, I'm taking Patrick Kane is still on the board, but it's not like 6 other teams can go try to get him now. And so, when you look at what the trade lists are going to look like, and I have to update my CJ's trade deadline big board. It's in shambles after the weekend because so many of the players that were on there, the last version of it now have been dealt. So I haven't actually done the exercise yet, Julian, but it's going to be a lot of defensemen near the top of that list, and teams looking for a forward like Carolina. I wonder where they go next. I mean, you have James Van Riemsdyk out there. I don't know if he's a perfect stylistic fit for a team that likes to play with as much pace as the Hurricanes do. I wonder about Max Domi. Chicago, I think, had interest in re-signing him and might still have interest in re-signing him. But when you see what some of these players are going for and you're where Chicago is in the standings, I mean, I think anything you can sell off might make sense. They've already scratched Sam Lafferty for trade-related reasons, so we would expect going to be moved. Wouldn't surprise me now to see Domi traded. but it's getting pretty thin in the forward ranks is kind of what I'm getting at. That there's certainly not high end difference makers out there. You now also got a few teams selling that we wouldn't have guessed. I mean, clearly Nashville is in a seller's position. I wonder if someone takes a jump at Matthias Ekholm, because I think he'd fit in on a lot of teams that are trying to go on a long playoff run this year. The cap ramifications are not insignificant, but it's pretty clear. David Poile, who, by the way, big news out of the weekend, is not going to be the Predators GM after June 30th. He's handing the job then to Barry Trotz, but he's starting to turn over some of the roster and giving Barry Trotz some future draft picks to work with. You got Washington now selling. They've got Lars Eller, Connor Sheary. And so I guess the big action is going to happen on the blue line, I would think. It seems like there's new teams getting involved on Chychrun. Washington, I think, is looking around there. I wouldn't be surprised if Carolina was making some kind of pitch for Chychrun. So I think there might be some renewed action there. Obviously, Los Angeles, we've connected to interest in that player for a long, long time. I wonder if Edmonton gets involved. I mean, I don't know what the Oilers are going to do, but they've on again, off again, at least kept tabs on that player. So there's a chance he goes. We've got Jake McCabe in Chicago. You got Gavrikov, Luke Shen. It sounds like Calgary actually, Julian, has some interest in Shen. Maybe he ends up coming to your city. But again, I see him as some of the other pieces might have to move first before we get clarity on, who's going to pay the price to Vancouver. The Canucks are interesting here. There's been some renewed speculation, I'll call it, over the weekend that JT Miller, his name being out there. Yeah. It's a big contract. We know that 8-year deal still kicks in next season. But maybe there's a window here where he can be moved. I don't know if they can pull that off. They've already had difficulty, of course, getting someone to take on, a couple of years of Brock Besser's deal. Is there a team out there willing to take that whole JT Miller contract? We'll have to see, but I think Vancouver certainly is in a selling posture and would like to clear out some bigger cap space, future commitments so that they can start, their process of building up again. I wonder about Thatcher Demko. To me, that still feels like an off-season move, but his name's out there. It's not really a robust goalie market, but you have expiring players like Jonas Korpisalo, James Reimer, Cam Talbot, who I think are available, but a team maybe looking for a longer-term fix might give us a surprise Thatcher Demko deal. So I think there's still the makings of a pretty busy and entertaining week. I mean, for my money, this has been an awesome NHL trading period because you're seeing actual difference-making players move. They're all these teams that are like only one Eastern Conference final team can go to the Stanley Cup final. And we've already had 5, as I mentioned, make significant moves. I think Carolina will make moves. Buffalo has all kinds of cap space. Buffalo's hanging around the wild card chase. I don't know that they're going to blow their brains out for a rental player, but maybe they get in and make a bigger move. I think they're kind of a little bit in the shadows. No one's really talking about them, but the Sabres have the ability to add salary for future years to make a big swing. And I think you can argue with a chance to get back in the playoffs after how long that drought has been. That's a pretty tantalizing prospect. Detroit, we never know what Steve Yzerman's up to fully. The latest indication is he's not going to sell any of his UFAs. Players like Tyler Bertuzzi, who certainly had a lot of interest from other teams. Maybe he becomes a buyer. I still think we're going to see some fireworks, man. I can't imagine that we will have just had the last 2 weeks we've had, and then it's all just going to grind to a halt and be, 8th defenseman for 5th round picks from here on out. I think we're going to get some surprises.
We got a lot to unpack out of all of that. There's a lot that could happen. By the way, Steve Yzerman on, I believe, the latest episode of Agent Provocateur with Alan Walsh on his podcast. You should check that out.
Yes. Do you know what's hilarious is that
what?
I remember, I'm old enough to remember. I remember covering that Jonathan Drouin saga, I'll call it, when he was sent to the American Hockey League and he disappeared from the Syracuse team at one point, didn't show up for a game. And, and the two central figures of that in some ways were Alan Walsh, the agent for Jonathan Drouin, who was obviously directing his client what to do, and Steve Yzerman, the Lightning general manager at the time. And I actually texted Alan after I saw the episode. I was like, wow, you and Steve are on amazingly good terms, given that in that moment, I don't know if they were on bad terms, but there was certainly a lot of tension in their relationship. Like they were in like a thermonuclear war at that time. And it just goes to show you that over time, all things get forgotten and, just funny, just a funny comment. Like I couldn't believe it. I was like, if you had told me 6 or 7 years ago, whenever that was going on, that they'd be like yucking it up on a podcast, I wouldn't have guessed that.
I gotta say, yeah, that's a very good point. I forgot about that saga for like a little bit, but I
drove
so
to
weird.
Syracuse a couple times and like interviewed Drew Ann. Like it was a big story, right? A 3rd overall pick, a really good team in the Lightning. It was a bit of a power struggle there. Drew Ann had been scratched in the Cup final in 2015. There's a lot of sort of drama for by NHL standards. We don't usually get that kind of drama where a player of that stature is sent to the American Hockey League and then doesn't show up for a game that he was supposed to play in. Like, anyway, awesome. Just a good memory.
And funny now, just to keep on with the theme we've been discussing, people are wondering if Jonathan Drouin will move before the deadline. I can't imagine for a lot, but that's a guy on an expiring contract.
Well, the Canadians are willing. I just don't know. I don't know if the market's there. I mean, there's a lot of players, the players like a JVR or Domi, even, Nick Bjugstad, Lafferty, I think that these guys for various reasons have more appeal. Most of them have smaller cap hits, not all of them that I just mentioned. Most of them, I think could be had for next to nothing. And, Jonathan Drouin's had a tough couple of years. I will never say never, but I don't think it's likely.
Do we want to say anything about David Poile and the Barry Trotz news? I know we kind of mentioned it a couple minutes ago, or do we want to save that for like stick taps or how's your brain right now? How do we want to go about that?
I mean, I am a mess today. I'm like, my brain's going in 1,000 directions. I think I'll say what's obvious here. David Poile, for those who don't know, is one of the finest gentlemen you'd ever encounter in the NHL. He's been the GM, the only GM the Predators have had, nearly 26 full years now. He was a GM in Washington before that. Earlier this year, celebrated his 3,000th game as a GM of an NHL team, which is just mind-boggling. He's actually been on year-to-year contracts for a number of years now. And so it wasn't as though, like, I think every year he was sort of like a player at the end of his career, maybe just taking it year by year, wasn't sure when the end would come. And, he's made the decision he's going to step aside. I think quite fittingly, the draft is in Nashville, June 28th and 29th. That's going to be his last big event as Predators general manager. And then he hands the reins over to Barry Trotz. I think Trotz is an interesting choice. I mean, nothing but respect for Barry, but, at age 60 to be thrown into that kind of role, certainly don't question his hockey knowledge or knowing on of the insides of the game, but it's a different animal when you're worried about salary caps and maybe even negotiating with some of his other peers in the GM group. I mean, it's going to be a big challenge, but obviously a very familiar face in that market, a guy who loves Nashville, wears it on his heart and sleeve, and he'll be helped. No GM operates alone nowadays. Everyone's got people in the front office that do various tasks, but it's an interesting choice. We haven't seen many coaches become GMs. I mean, there was a time, Pat Quinn and Mike Keenan, were coach and GM at the same time, 20, 25 years ago, Daryl Sutter. But that, we moved away from that because the demands of both jobs have just grown to a point where no one could do both. But, not many coaches would ever be able to be in a position to make this jump. And so, I haven't given it too much thought, but I just think it'll be interesting to see how that goes with Barry Trotz, because he's coming in at an interesting time for the Predators, right? They have a lot of longer term contracts. It feels like they've kind of taken that group as far as they can take it. We're seeing that now with some selling going on from that team. What direction it takes next will be very interesting. How they handle, say, a player like Roman Josi, who's just signed a long-term contract, their captain. Would they ever consider moving him down the road? All those types. There's big questions, I think, there. They won't be answered probably for quite some time. But this is a real big set of news for the NHL and for the Predators specifically. And, something we'll be watching closely.
So it's Monday, so we got to do Ask CJ. How about this, Siege? We do Ask CJ today, and the questions will be, more hockey focused, who's going to move where, all that stuff. And then for our post-trade deadline show, like we did last year, we try to get some more fun questions. Would you like that?
Yeah, for sure. Because I'm gonna flame out if we talk too much hockey for too much longer.
Okay, I'll try to make sure today's questions don't harm you too much in terms of your level of fatigue or whatnot. Anyway,
Yeah.
Thank you to everyone who sent in questions on Twitter or Discord. Let's start with a dill pickle. How much of trade details are NHL clubs obligated to release to the public?
I think as much as they deem fit, right? Like some teams, when they make a trade announcement, will tell us in the release or in their tweet, we retain X amount of percent on this player. Some teams put in this very specific clauses and conditions that are attached to draft picks. As San Jose did, that there's, pretty wordy set of conditions on the 2024 pick that, New Jersey is sending to San Jose, and the Sharks disclosed all that, and others don't. I personally don't get that wrapped up in it because it's basically, I deem it my job if a team doesn't announce that stuff to find it out one way or another. There's lots of ways to do that. And so, I guess in a perfect world, everything is just easily laid out and whatever, but I'm glad as someone who's able to find out that stuff that not everybody releases it all, because it gives me an avenue to provide some value. So I don't know if that answers the spirit of the question. I feel like in a salary cap world, quite honestly, this isn't a big issue for me, as I say, because again, I recognize if a team doesn't announce a contract, I'll just probably find it out anyway and report it. But, we have a hard salary cap. Like, I don't get the secrets. I don't get why every team just doesn't say what the breakdown of a contract is or what have you, because it's actually impactful on how they do business, and it's important. And that's why sites like Puckpedia and Cap Friendly are so important for hockey fans too, because it helps us understand what our teams can do. And so I think really most teams should announce everything, but if they don't, I'll be bugging somebody and getting that info anyway.
Speaking of teams who make that difficult, here's a question from Carl the Man 21. Hey, CJ and Julian, I wonder if you guys think that the Islanders might add more at the trade deadline. Please answer on the pod, because CJ's articles are not available here in Sweden. That needs to be fixed.
Wow.
I don't know how that's possible.
I don't know either. I'll tell you this though. I do think the Islanders will add again. I mean, you make obviously the Horvat trade when you couple it with the 8-year contract extension he signed. That's not just a short-term move, but it's a move designed to get them into the playoffs. They're still in that mix, and just knowing Lou Lamoriello, I don't see him becoming a seller. He's got players like Varlamov or Scott Mayfield that are UFAs that I think would have a lot of value if he wanted to move on from them and sort of punt on the season. But I don't think that's in his DNA. And so I think Lou will be adding still yet more before the deadline. Unfortunately, Matt Barzal's out injured. It's not for the remainder of the season. I think something in the 4 to 6 week kind of range, depending on how his knee recovers. But in the meantime, I wouldn't be surprised at all to see Sweet Lou go out and add to his team and try to give them everything they need to get into a wild card spot.
Sweet Lou. From Matt Mastrangelo on Twitter. Which Coyote moves first? Nick Schmaltz, Jacob Chikrin, Shane Bear, or Nick Bukestad? And most likely landing spot.
Oh, man. Well, I mean, I think there's a world they all move. I'll say that. The toughest will probably be Schmaltz. His name has certainly been out there more. But, he carries term and all those things. He's got a back-ended contract in terms of more money being owed than the cap hit. So some teams will have to take that into consideration. I think Bear and Bukestad will both be easy players to move. Neither earns a lot of money. Both have had pretty good seasons. I know Bear has just returned from an injury here in recent weeks, but I know that there's a lot of contending teams that like them as sort of cheaper pickups. So I think that they speak for themselves. Chikrin, I can't even handicap at this point in time. As I said, there's still like tons of interest in this guy. Like at some point in time, almost every NHL team has been linked to him, right? And it's that's partly reflection of the fact he's been on the trade market for 2 years. No one has yet paid the price. Maybe at the last minute, Bill Armstrong's willing to lower his price a little bit, and that might get it done. I have to believe it's best for everyone involved, though, if he's traded at this deadline. I don't know where he's going. Maybe it's LA. Maybe Washington gets it done. Maybe Carolina swoops in. I mean, Rob Rossi had in The Athletic report that the Pittsburgh Penguins have made overtures at him too. So I think there's all kinds of possibilities still there, but I can't tell you where all those players are going, but I think there's a good chance at least 3 out of 4 of them are traded by Friday.
I got a question from a guy on Discord, or someone on Discord, whose name is spelled Sna and it's Hans backwards, but I think it's a really I think it's a fun question. So Shea Weber's contract got traded, but my friends and I were wondering something about Robida contracts being traded as reference to Robida Island. Are players that are on indefinite LTIR obligated to move to the city in which their contract was traded to?
They're not obligated to move there, but every year they do have to report for a physical. So, even players who there's an understanding won't be back at some point in time have to go and, go through the physical process and essentially fail the physical or have the doctors confirm whatever their issue is. And this is true even of Joffrey Lupul, right? Remember, Joffrey Lupul was kind of an infamous / famous one in Toronto. He kind of disappeared under mysterious circumstances, still had a couple years left on his deal. He still had to come into Toronto and sort of quote unquote fail his physical once every year. What's interesting about the Shea Weber situation is he was actually working with the Golden Knights farm team in Henderson a little bit. He'd been on the ice with them, I think. And, it wasn't formal work, but, was actually kind of interested in what the organization was doing. And by them moving his contract, I would assume he can't do that anymore with another team. He might have laid some groundwork for a point when his contract's expired and he can go back and do that. But, obviously that was a move Vegas had to make, but yeah, I mean, you actually get paid by that team. You have to do certain things that every player has to do, like a physical at the start and end of each season. And, a lot of great players have ended up just taking a trip to Arizona at the end of their career for those routine physicals and cashing checks from the Coyotes, but never playing for that team.
So I think we've gone through this whole episode and nothing broke. The trade winds have calmed down, which means there's probably a good chance we'll hear about some trade after this episode drops. I'm ready for it.
It's Monday morning and I'm exhausted, man.
Yeah, dude, I can't imagine what your last past weekend has been like for you.
It's no different. It's just, a lot of pestering people, a lot of staring at the phone, a lot of unreturned texts. But it's a war zone, but there's so much stuff going on. I mean, it's fun too, don't get me wrong, but it's just funny to have so much action this far out from the deadline. It just makes me wonder, like, holy crap, what are these next few days going to be like?
But it is a bit of a thrill to be like, texting a GM or messaging an agent and be like, okay, are they going to get back to me? And then you get that message back and you're like, holy crap. Like that's really fun.
Sure, there's a rush to it for sure. But it's also kind of stressful because, like, at some point you are supposed to do something else in your life. I didn't get anything accomplished this weekend, put it that way. I got a couple runs in, so I kept my streak going. But other than that, just because there was so much action, I just was glued to my phone. Didn't, had a couple games on in the background, but didn't really get to watch the games. Didn't get my laundry done. All the stuff you might want to accomplish on a weekend didn't happen.
Whoa. Get your laundry done, sir. Okay. Please do that.
Yeah. Hopefully today's quiet and I can catch up there today.
I hope so too. We'll be back Thursday with a new episode, and the post-trade deadline show will give more details on that. Starting now, get your questions in. They have to be fun ones. Don't give any did this team do well at the deadline? Why didn't my team do a trade? Give us fun stuff, pizza toppings or something.
Be clear. We'll have a bonus show on Saturday. We'll recap what happened at the deadline, the news, maybe the trades that didn't happen that were close, all that stuff. So we'll go over that Saturday. And then next Monday, when it's a couple days, everything's been digested. Next Monday, we'll get goofy. We'll get ridic.
Okay, fine. Saturday will be serious. Monday will be goofy. For next Monday's Ask CJ, get the goofy stuff in. Saturday we'll be serious because that's what we do on the show. Big J
Journos, buddy. Big J Journos.
Oh, so you've reached this part of the podcast where we have to add this on because a trade went through after we finished recording, and it involves the Toronto Maple Leafs. So welcome to Leafs Corner, CJ. We got to talk about the Toronto Maple Leafs and the fact that they've acquired Jake McCabe, Sam Lafferty, a conditional 5th round pick in 2024, a conditional 5th round pick in 2025 from Chicago in exchange for a conditional 1st in 2025, a 2026 second round pick, Joey Anderson, and Pavel Gogolev. Did I get that right?
I think so. That's a big move. You know, this is Kyle Dubas's moment where he's behaving the way we've seen the Lightning go in recent years. You know, it's not to say that this will have the same outcome as the Lightning, but I think what's key here is that both of these players are not rentals, and they're both still in the primes of their career. 50% of McCabe's contract was also retained by Chicago, which is not insignificant because teams are always willing to retain a contract that's expiring. But in the case of McCabe, they're retaining $2 million each of the next 2 years. And so he becomes a $2 million player for the Maple Leafs. And of course, I can tell you, I don't know what's going to happen this year, but I bet when we're talking about the Maple Leafs next season, they're going to have cap struggles or just cap challenges. And so that makes him more palatable. In Sam Lafferty's case, it's $1.1 million against the cap that he's earning, and he's under contract next season as well. And so this to me is sort of straight from the Julien Brisebois playbook in terms of, giving up future draft capital. I mean, a 2025 first rounder. I mean, how old is that kid today? I mean, that it kind of goes back to what we talked about at the top of this episode is that player isn't going to be anywhere near ready to help the Leafs as long as Austin Matthews and Mitch Marner and the like are on the team. And so you're trading off the future for the present and smartly getting a couple years of service from at least McCabe and one extra one from Lafferty. So, this is a big swing by Toronto, especially in the wake of the O'Reilly and Achari deals that we've already seen. And, I think it's one that people should be excited about to follow this team, because this is by far on paper the best Leafs team of these 7 years. Again, usual disclaimer, that doesn't mean it's going to work. It doesn't mean it's going to gel, but it's hard to imagine the Leafs with a deeper team that's cap compliant than the one I have right now.
With all these moves and being in the eye of Julien Brisebois, you'd think the Leafs were preparing to play a series against the Lightning or something.
Well, isn't that convenient? Isn't that convenient? And look, it's two front offices. This is the funny part. Away from the heat of competition, I know there's a lot of respect and admiration between the Leafs front office and the Lightnings. I think that they're, socially friendly in the sense that I think that they look at what each other do and recognize it's a very worthy competitor at what you're, and there's limited assets. You're trying to win. There's only one Stanley Cup. There's only one team that can come out of that first round series, all that kind of stuff. But they're behaving in somewhat the same manner. And I really don't think that's a total coincidence. And I think it's smart, honestly. I mean, look, we know the Leafs. I mean, there's a world where Austin Matthews signs an extension and everyone does. And maybe this is a 10-year more run with this group of players. We've seen that happen in Pittsburgh and Washington, for example, in Chicago until right now. I mean, those teams kept, cores built around the same, couple guys for a really long time, but there's no guarantee of that. And so, who can really care about the 2026 second rounder? I get why the Blackhawks do, is they're entering this pretty significant rebuild they're in. But if you're in Toronto's end, you've got better players now in your lineup today. You've got hard lineup decisions. You have maybe future decisions about players on the current roster about whether they stay beyond the deadline, and you've still got a few days to make those decisions, which I think is also crucial here. This is a second straight move that's left Kyle Dubas and his front office a long time to regroup and to see what else is out there. And I don't think they're necessarily done just yet.
You took the words out of my mouth, because the next question I was going to ask is, okay, what's next for the Toronto Maple Leafs?
Well, they have a cap issue that will be pressing when Matt Murray's ready to come off long-term injured reserve. He's nearing a return from an ankle injury. I don't believe that's going to happen in the next 2 days, but certainly by the end of the week, I think it's possible. And so, they can go about it a couple ways here. It sounds like some rival teams are already calling the Leafs now, wondering what the price is on some of their potentially expendable UFAs, players like Alex Kerfoot or Justin Hall, maybe Pierre Engvall. And so the Leafs can now take that time to gauge the market to see, is there a trade that makes sense? Maybe by trading one of those players out, they can start to, get back a little bit of some of the draft capital they've spent here. But they don't have to do that. I think that this is what's important is, they can also get cap compliant by sending Joseph Wall down to the American Hockey League. He's been the backup goalie while Murray's been out injured, and one more player that makes 1.1 million or a bit above that. And so I don't know who that would be, and it would require a player that most likely that has to be put on waivers. But there's a way to do this where it doesn't guarantee they're trading someone off the roster. And I think that, now they can take a moment and see where that is and what makes sense. And, it's too soon. We're recording this pretty soon after the trade is dropped for me to say who that will be or how that's going to look. But I think that's what they're going to be working through now in the immediate future, is just figuring out, what's the best course. And I think that they have an open mind, much like the Leafs always do. I mean, it's some teams really focus, like, we need to get this exact thing. And I think the Leafs really do approach all these deadlines like, what is the best possible ways to make our team better? And that could be getting someone like Ryan O'Reilly. It could be getting, I think that they consider all possibilities. And so, the other thing I'd say here, if we're looking at the league wide ramifications of this move, seems like the prices are coming down a bit. This does not bode well for Columbus and Gavrikov, for example, because the Leafs just paid a first and second, essentially. I know there's other parts of this, and got Lafferty and McCabe at 50% retained. Gavrikov, Columbus was hoping to get a first and third for him straight up. It just seems to me that that's going to be a difficult thing for them to achieve. And so we might be seeing this sort of slowly morph into a bit of a buyer's market. I'm aware that I'm saying this less than 12 hours or a little more than 12 hours after, Julien BriseBois played 5 draft picks and Cal Foote for Tanner Jeannot. So, I mean, that, one of these, it's not like every move is directly correlated to the next move. But we are, I think, going to see the prices drop a little bit now. And man, we still got, it's 3:00 Eastern right now on Monday as we're recording this. We still got 4 whole days till the deadline. It's wild to think of what else might still materialize here.
Did you see? I'm sure you did. The statement Julien BriseBois, at least that's been put out there, about essentially him justifying the draft picks that he unloaded to get Tanner Jeannot, which kind of more or less falls in line with how you were trying to explain it from his vantage point when we spoke about it in the earlier time we recorded this podcast earlier this morning.
Yeah, and I think that there's a lot of crossover here with what the Leafs are thinking, right? He said, to paraphrase him, what are the odds of those players are ready to make a difference in a window where we can win the cup? None, 0, zilch. So why not go all in? I mean, this is the craziest deadline period I can ever remember, man. Seriously, like I'm sure you can maybe draw one 20 years ago. We used to see a little bit more action at the deadlines, kind of in the manner we're seeing now. But in recent times, I can't think of anything that equates to this, where all the teams are just, in the East are trading first rounders and really making big moves and they're all chasing the same thing. I think maybe it's somewhat related because, if whether you're the GM of the Boston Bruins at the very top of the league all year long, or in New Jersey, Carolina, it's going to be a hard road just to even get to the second round, the third round, and someone's going to reach the Stanley Cup final. And so you get the sense that these GMs just don't want to let this period pass and have any regrets about what they didn't do.
Well, at least the Eastern Conference ones do. Seems like the Western Conference ones are either just selling, they got Nino Niederreiter, and that's really it.
Ivan Barbashev
for now
for the Golden Knights.
Yeah, that's fine. Yes, that's true. That's true.
But you're
Vegas
right.
did get Ivan Barbashev. That's true.
The truth is, no one in the West that we've seen is like trading multiple first rounders and really loading up. I mean, there's no one who's behaving that way. I mean, let's see what Colorado does. They're going to have some long-term injured reserve space to potentially use here, but we're running out of players. It would seem. The Oilers have interest in Matthias Ekholm, Joel Edmondson. Maybe they make a bigger swing than some of their counterparts out west. But yeah, it's been very Eastern based, and Toronto's got to go through the East. That's been part of their problem. That's part of the reason they haven't won a playoff series, I think, is they've faced some pretty tough matchups along the way too in those years, and went to Game 7 in basically all of them. And so they're banking on a little bit more sandpaper, I'd say too. That's the other part. We didn't really get into the players, but McCabe and Lafferty, I do bring, add to an element that the Leafs are clearly trying to address here. I think Noel Acciari fits some of that mold too. Obviously Ryan O'Reilly, good 200-foot player. It's not just someone that's there to put the puck in the net. And so the Leafs are changing a little bit the shape of what they are. And I think trying to be a little heavier, a little bit more ready for playoff hockey when it comes.
All right. Is there anything else you want to throw out there, whether it's off this Leafs trade, whether it's off anything that could happen today, anything percolating in your big brain that you want to drop before we sign off for real this time.
I still didn't get my laundry done. So, you know, all I'll say is this: we should probably wrap this up and get this thing on the web somewhere. Get this on YouTube. Get this out on the podcatchers, because I'm worried it's going to be dated again. We're going to be doing like 3 addendums to this podcast.
Jeez, man. And think about it. Like we haven't even got, there's so many other things we kind of touched on the David Poile thing, the Keandre Miller spitting incident that happened over the weekend. We barely touched up on that too. There's just been so much other news for us to get to. And you're right. Like if we don't get this out there now, like it's just going to be dated. Who knows what other move could happen once this episode actually sees the light of day, which by the time you all hear this, it definitely would have. All right.
Makes you feel better too. Honestly, I wish I could show you my text. I'm just getting texts from all these people. So-and-so from this radio, so-and-so from here. Can you do hits?
No way. You can't be doing those hits now.
The answer is a big no. I'm saving the good stuff for the Chris Johnston Show.
That's what's up.
And I say that with respect to my colleagues doing those radio shows around the continent, but there's only one me and only so little time.
Would you clone yourself if you had the opportunity?
No.
Why not?
I don't know. That I have never thought about it, but that seems no, it would be weird.
You wouldn't. So wait, like for like a deadline week like this, like you wouldn't clone yourself and like so you could do all those little things?
No, I'm all here for AI to be able to like take the thoughts in my brain and put them into a nicely written column.
Oh, I'm not down with that at all. No.
I'm down with that because I've got lots of thoughts and lots of info, but the writing time is hard when your phone's going bananas. But you know, that's anyway, that we're way down the rabbit hole here, bud.
Go do your laundry. For Siege, I'm Julian. We'll be back on Thursday with a brand new episode of the Chris Johnston Show. Peace.
The Chris Johnston Show.
Powered by Sports Interaction. Want to bet?
Inside the Game, twice a week. Follow Chris on Twitter @ReporterChris. And follow Julian McKenzie @JK McKenzie.
The Chris Johnston Show.